The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the pavement as two cops slammed a teenage boy against a police car. His hands were locked behind his back, cold metal digging into his skin. His heart pounded, his breath uneven. He had done nothing wrong. No questions, no explanation, just handcuffs. The officers didn't know who he was, but they were about to find out. And when they did, everything changed. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one. The street was quiet except for the soft buzz of streetlights flickering on. The warm glow of the setting sun stretched across the neighborhood, casting long shadows against the pavement. Ryan walked at an easy pace, his gym bag slung over his shoulder, earbuds in, lost in his thoughts. His basketball jersey clung to his back, still damp with sweat from practice. It was a routine he knew well. Leave the gym, take the shortcut through the neighborhood, and be home in 10 minutes. As he neared the corner, the sudden glare of headlights flashed behind him. The low rumble of an engine grew louder, then a sharp screech of tires cut through the air as a police cruiser pulled up fast, stopping just inches from the curb. "Stop right there! Hands where we can see them!" The voice was loud and commanding. Officer Bradley stepped out first, hand already near his holster. Officer Keene followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the street as if expecting to find something more. Rayan stiffened, his breath catching in his throat. His heartbeat drummed against his ribs. Slowly he pulled out his earbuds, confusion knitting his brows. "What?" His voice came out steadier than he expected. "You fit the description," Bradley said, taking a step closer. "What description?" Rayan asked, glancing around. There was no one else here. Just him. Just them. Keene didn't answer. Instead, he moved in quickly, grabbing Rayan's arm and twisting it behind his back. Cold metal locked around his wrists. The sharp bite of the handcuffs made him flinch. "Hey!" A shove against his shoulder cut him off. "Don't resist," Bradley warned, tightening his grip. Rayan's chest rose and fell fast, panic creeping in. He wasn't resisting. He hadn't even moved. Across the street, Amina, a woman on her porch, froze in place. Her phone was already up, recording. A few houses down, Mr. Lawson, an older man, stood behind his window watching in silence. Another neighbor, Luis, leaned against his fence, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Ryan's mouth felt dry. He had seen this scene before, on the news and viral videos. But now it wasn't someone else. It was him. "Check my ID," he tried again, his voice strained. "I'm just going home." Bradley grabbed his gym bag, tossing it to the ground like trash. "Quiet." Rayan clenched his jaw. His father had warned him about moments like this. "Stay calm, keep your hands where they can see them, speak slowly." But no one had told him what to do when staying calm didn't matter, when the cuffs were already on. Amina took a step closer, her voice ringing out. "Why are you arresting him?" Keene shot her a sharp look. "Step back, ma'am." The second officer reached for his radio. "Bringing one in." "For what?" Ryan wanted to ask, but the words stuck in his throat. The street felt smaller. The flashing lights burned against his skin. The cuffs dug deeper into his wrists. They didn't know. They had no idea who he was. But they were about to find out. The night air felt colder now, even though the heat of the day still lingered on the pavement. Rayan's breath came in slow, measured inhales, trying to steady the rising panic swelling inside his chest. His fingers twitched behind him, the cuffs pressing harder against his skin with every slight movement. His shoulders ached from the way Keene had forced his arms back. But that wasn't what was making his head spin. It was the looks in their eyes. Bradley and Keene weren't just following procedure. They had already made up their minds about him. Bradley tightened his grip on Rayan's arm, giving it a firm tug. "Move!" Rayan didn't move right away. His feet felt glued to the pavement. "You still haven't told me why." Bradley yanked him forward before he could finish. The sharp pull nearly made him stumble, but he caught himself. Keene sighed like he was already tired of this conversation. "A store was robbed 2 blocks from here. Witness described a young black male, dark hoodie, bag over his shoulder." Rayan blinked. His voice was sharper now. "I just came from the gym. Look inside my bag. It's got my jersey, my shoes." My school ID. Bradley scoffed. Yeah, and every guy we pick up has an excuse. Amina stepped forward from her porch, her phone still up, recording everything. That's not an excuse. That's the truth. I saw him walking from the gym just 10 minutes ago. Keen looked at her for a second, but quickly turned his attention back to Rayan. If that's true, we'll confirm it at the station. Rayan's stomach twisted. The station? Luis shook his head from where he stood near the fence. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. So you're cuffing him first and asking questions later? Bradley's head snapped toward Luis. Sir, I suggest you mind your business. Luis held up his hands. Just saying, I've lived here 15 years. Never seen this kid cause trouble. Maybe don't be so quick to throw him in the back seat. Rayan clenched his jaw. His fist tightened instinctively, but his hands were trapped behind him. He wanted to fight back. Not physically. He knew that would only make things worse. But with his words, with his presence. But he knew deep down that none of that mattered. A car pulled onto the street, slowing as it approached the flashing red and blue lights. The vehicle stopped just behind the police cruiser. For a second, Rayan thought it was just another neighbor coming to see what was happening. Then the driver's side door opened, and everything changed. Bradley's grip on Rayan's arm loosened slightly as a tall, broad-shouldered man in a suit stepped out of the car. The slight breeze ruffled his tie as he moved with purpose toward them. His face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something neither officer could ignore. Keen's face went pale. Bradley's fingers twitched near his belt. Rayan exhaled slowly. His father had arrived. The weight of the moment pressed down on the street like a heavy storm cloud about to burst. Rayan's father, Nathaniel, walked toward them with an air of quiet control, the kind that made people straighten up without thinking. His polished shoes barely made a sound against the pavement, but his presence was louder than any siren. Bradley's grip on Rayan's arm slackened slightly, though he didn't let go. Keen took an uneasy step back, his mouth opening like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Nathaniel's eyes flickered to the cuffs on his son's wrists, and then to the officer's. His jaw tightened, but when he spoke, his voice was calm, deliberate. Take those off. Now. His words weren't loud, but they carried weight. The kind of weight that came with authority, with power. Bradley hesitated, shifting slightly. Sir, we were just... Nathaniel's gaze snapped to him so fast that Bradley swallowed whatever excuse he was about to make. Take them off. Keen glanced at Bradley, uncertainty written all over his face. The moment stretched, thick with tension. The air was so still that even the neighbors stopped murmuring. The only sound was the low hum of the cruiser's engine and the distant chirping of crickets. Bradley clenched his jaw. His hand hovered near his holster, but he thought better of it. Slowly, he pulled the key from his belt and stepped behind Rayan. With a flick and a metallic click, the cuffs unlocked. Rayan rolled his wrists the moment they were free, the dull ache pulsing through his hands. Nathaniel took a slow breath, as if steadying himself. His face was unreadable, but Rayan could see the rage sitting just beneath the surface. The kind of rage that didn't need shouting or threats. The kind of rage that made men like Bradley nervous. Nathaniel turned back to the officers, his expression sharp. Now tell me, officers, what exactly did my son do? Keen was the first to speak, his voice carefully measured. There was a robbery 2 blocks from here. The suspect was described as a young black male in a hoodie, carrying a bag. Nathaniel blinked, unimpressed. So that was enough to cuff him? To throw him against your car like a criminal? Bradley's face hardened. We were just doing our job. No, Nathaniel said smoothly, shaking his head. You weren't doing your job. You were following your bias. Because if my son looked different, if he wasn't black, you wouldn't have put those cuffs on him before asking a single question. Bradley's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. Keen cleared his throat. Sir, we were just bringing him in for questioning. If he's innocent, he'd be released within an hour. Nathaniel let out a sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it. An hour? Do you know how many black boys don't make it out of that 1 hour? Do you even understand how dangerous your assumption could have been? Keen looked away. He had no answer for that. Rayan's wrist still burned. His mind was spinning, but he kept his mouth shut. He wasn't sure what came next, but he knew the officers had lost control of the situation. His father was picking them apart, piece by piece, with nothing but words. Bradley exhaled sharply. "Look, Governor!" Nathaniel's expression darkened. Bradley stopped mid-sentence. He realized too late. Keen's head whipped toward Bradley, his eyes widening in silent horror. Ryan saw the exact moment it hit them. The way their bodies stiffened, their backs straightened, their hands twitched. They hadn't just cuffed the wrong kid, they had cuffed the governor's son. A thick silence swallowed the street. The weight of Bradley's mistake hung between them, like an axe ready to fall. The blood drained from Keen's face, his fingers twitching at his side. Bradley's usual arrogance wavered for the first time, his chest rising and falling faster than before. Nathaniel took a slow, deliberate step forward. His presence alone was enough to make both officers shift uncomfortably. "You were saying, officer?" Nathaniel's voice was razor-sharp. Bradley licked his lips, the confidence he had moments ago slipping. "Governor, sir, we—" Keen started, but Nathaniel cut him off with a look. Rayan stood still, rubbing his wrists, the soreness still fresh. His father hadn't even looked at him yet, but he didn't have to. He could feel the fury radiating off of him. Nathaniel took another step, his tone even but dangerously controlled. "So you were just doing your job when you cuffed my son? Without asking a single question? Without checking his ID? Without—" He motioned toward Rayan's gym bag, still lying on the ground. "Looking inside the bag you so casually tossed aside?" Bradley's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced at Keen, but there was no backup there. Keen looked like he wanted to sink into the pavement. Nathaniel's lips pressed into a tight line. "I've spent my entire career fighting to build trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve." His voice was calm, but the steel beneath it was unmissable. "Yet here you are, proving why so many people don't trust you." Keen's head dropped slightly, as if he knew there was no way out of this. Bradley, on the other hand, squared his shoulders, grasping at the last shred of control he thought he had. "We didn't know who he was." His voice was stiff, forced. Nathaniel's eyes darkened. "And that makes it better?" Bradley hesitated. "No, but—" "Stop talking." The command cut through the air like a blade. Bradley flinched, and for the first time he looked afraid. Nathaniel took a slow breath, like a man deciding how much damage he wanted to do. His gaze swept over them, cold and calculating. Then he reached into his suit pocket and pulled out his phone. Bradley and Keen immediately tensed. "Governor," Keen blurted, voice tight with panic. "Let's not—" Nathaniel held up a hand, silencing him. He wasn't dialing a number. He was scrolling, looking for something. Then with precise movements, he turned the screen toward them. The police chief's name lit up the screen in bold letters. Bradley's stomach visibly sank. "You want to explain this to your boss?" Nathaniel asked, tilting his head slightly. His voice was quiet, deadly. Keen swallowed hard. Bradley clenched his fists. Rayan watched them both, something unfamiliar twisting in his chest. Fear. For the first time, the cops were the ones afraid. Bradley's jaw tightened as he stared at the name on Nathaniel's phone screen. The arrogance he had carried just minutes ago had drained from his face, replaced by something colder. Panic. Keen shifted beside him, eyes darting toward the growing crowd of onlookers. The weight of the situation was sinking in fast. Nathaniel didn't say another word. He didn't have to. His finger hovered over the screen, ready to make the call. The tension thickened like a noose tightening around the officers' necks. Keen broke first. "Governor, listen." His voice was rushed, uneasy. "This was a misunderstanding. We made a mistake." Nathaniel let the words settle in the air. Then slowly he lowered the phone. "A mistake." He repeated it like he was testing the weight of it. His eyes flickered to Rayan. "Son, did you resist?" Rayan shook his head, his throat dry. "No." Nathaniel turned back to the officers, his voice deceptively calm. "Did you ask him any questions before putting him in cuffs?" Keen's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. A muscle twitched in Nathaniel's jaw. "Tell me, officers," he continued, voice sharp now, "how many young black men have you mistakenly arrested this way?" Bradley stiffened. His fingers curled slightly, as if he wanted to lash out. But he wasn't in control anymore. Keene inhaled sharply, eyes darting to Bradley, as if silently begging him to shut up. But it was too late. Nathaniel's eyes burned through him. "What did you just say?" Bradley squared his shoulders, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage of his pride. "I said, you're making this bigger than it is. We were doing our job. Your son fit the description. If you weren't the governor, we wouldn't even be having this conversation." The street fell into silence. Even the sound of the crickets seemed to vanish. Ryan's stomach twisted. He shouldn't have been surprised by the words, but hearing them out loud, hearing Bradley admit it was different. Luis shook his head from the sidewalk. "Wow, he really said it," Amina whispered under her breath, her phone still recording every second. Nathaniel nodded slowly, processing Bradley's words. Then he let out a small, sharp breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You don't even hear yourself, do you?" Nathaniel's voice was dangerously soft now. "You just admitted that if this were any other black boy, he'd be on his way to jail right now. No questions asked, no due process. And you go home tonight without giving it a second thought." Bradley's nostrils flared, but he couldn't deny it. Keene's face was frozen in horror, realizing that whatever thin chance they had of walking away from this clean was gone. Nathaniel lifted his phone again. This time there was no hesitation. One ring. Two. Then a deep, stern voice came through the speaker. "Governor, what can I do for you?" Nathaniel's eyes locked onto Bradley and Keene. He didn't blink. "Chief," Nathaniel said, his voice steady, "we have a problem." Bradley's breath hitched. Keene took a step back, as if the words physically hit him. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest. For the first time since this nightmare started, it felt like something was shifting, and the officers could feel it too. The power had just changed hands. The tension on the street thickened as Nathaniel held the phone to his ear, his gaze locked on Bradley and Keene. The weight of those 4 words, "We have a problem," had already sent a shiver through them. The call had been made. There was no undoing it now. The police chief's voice came through the speaker, steady but cautious. "What kind of problem, sir?" Nathaniel didn't look away from the officers as he spoke. "I'm standing in the middle of Maplewood Drive, watching 2 of your officers put my son in handcuffs for no reason." Silence, then a sharp intake of breath from the other end of the line. Keene's hands twitched at his sides. He knew. He knew exactly how this was about to go. Bradley, still clinging to whatever power he thought he had left, lifted his chin. "Governor, there was a robbery nearby. He matched the description. We were following protocol." Nathaniel let out a slow, controlled breath, tilting his head slightly. "Protocol? Your protocol is to cuff first and ask questions later? To assume guilt based on nothing but skin color and a hoodie?" "Sir," Keene started, but the chief's voice cut through the speaker, firm and sharp. "Which officers?" Nathaniel's lip curled slightly, though his tone remained dangerously calm. "Officers Bradley and Keene." On the other end of the call, the sound of a chair scraping against a floor came through. The police chief was standing up. Bradley's face paled. Keene's shoulders visibly tensed. The voice on the phone turned colder. "Governor, I'll be there in 5 minutes." The line went dead. Nathaniel lowered the phone with the slow precision of a man who already knew he had won. His fingers tapped against the side of the device before sliding it back into his pocket. His expression didn't change, but there was something final in the way he looked at the officers. Keene exhaled shakily, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Governor, listen." Nathaniel's voice was quiet. Too quiet. "Number you listen." He took a step forward, his presence alone making Keene swallow his words. "I've spent years trying to hold this city together," Nathaniel said, his voice sharp and deliberate. "Years trying to convince people that men like you could be trusted, that if they just cooperated, just stayed calm, they'd make it home." He shook his head, letting out a bitter breath. "And tonight, you proved that I was wrong." Bradley's face twisted with something ugly. He had never been a man who liked being told he was wrong. He had never been a man who feared consequences, until now. Nathaniel turned slightly, gesturing toward Amina, Luis, and the growing number of neighbors watching in silence. "You see that?" His voice was laced with quiet fury. "You didn't just humiliate my son. You humiliated yourselves. In front of everyone. In front of their cameras. In front of their eyes. Amina's phone was still raised. She hadn't stopped recording. The red light blinked steadily, capturing every second. Keene finally broke. "Governor, please, we weren't trying to—" Nathaniel held up a hand. "Save it for your boss." Keene's lips parted, but the look in Nathaniel's eyes stopped him from saying anything else. Ryan stood still, his heartbeat still uneven, his wrists still sore. He should have felt relieved. He should have felt safe. But he didn't. Because what if his father hadn't shown up? What if he had been just another kid in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with no power to change the outcome? The thought sat heavy in his chest. A siren wailed in the distance. The police chief was coming. And when he arrived, nothing would ever be the same for Officers Bradley and Keene. The sound of the approaching siren sliced through the heavy silence on the street, growing louder with every second. Bradley and Keene stood frozen, their postures stiff, their faces caught between anger and dread. The realization had fully sunk in. This was no longer just a routine stop gone wrong. This was a career-ending mistake. Nathaniel remained still, his hands now resting in his pockets. But there was nothing casual about his stance. His silence was heavier than his words had been. He had made the call, and now all that was left was to watch the fallout. Rayan's eyes flickered between the officers and his father. His heart still pounded from the adrenaline, his fingers still tingling from where the cuffs had been. But something deeper settled in his chest, the weight of knowing how close he had been to becoming just another statistic. His father's voice cut through the air like steel. "Tell me something," Nathaniel said, his gaze locked on Bradley. "If I wasn't standing here right now, what would have happened to my son?" Keene shifted uncomfortably, but Bradley's jaw tightened. He had nothing to say. Nathaniel took a slow step forward. "Would he be in the back of your car?" Another step. "Would you be roughing him up in some alley, making sure he learned his place?" Bradley scoffed, trying to regain some of his lost authority. "We don't do that." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow, amused but unimpressed. "No? You sure about that?" He motioned toward Rayan. "Because he wasn't resisting. He wasn't armed. He wasn't dangerous. And yet, he ended up in cuffs." "Explain that to me." Bradley stayed silent. Keene swallowed hard, eyes flickering toward the flashing lights of the police cruiser, as if hoping it could save him. Luis, still standing by his fence, let out a short, bitter laugh. "Yeah, go ahead. Explain it." Amina, phone still raised, added, "We're all waiting." The neighbors weren't whispering anymore. They were standing tall, watching, their expressions sharp with something that had been simmering for years, a truth that couldn't be ignored anymore. The first set of headlights appeared at the end of the street, followed by another. The police SUV rolled to a stop just behind Bradley and Keene's cruiser. The siren cut off, but the blue and red lights still flashed, casting flickering shadows against the pavement. The back door opened, and Police Chief Morris stepped out. His uniform was crisp, his boots polished, but there was nothing neat about the expression on his face. His eyes flicked from Nathaniel to Rayan, then to the two officers who now looked like men waiting for a verdict. The neighbors shifted, sensing the shift in power. Morris walked toward them, his steps measured, controlled. He came to a stop just inches from Bradley and Keene, his hands clasped behind his back. His voice was calm but firm. "Governor, what happened here?" Nathaniel didn't turn to greet him. He kept his eyes on Bradley. "Why don't you ask your officers?" Morris exhaled slowly before turning his gaze to Bradley and Keene. His voice was a low warning. "Well?" Bradley squared his shoulders. Still clinging to authority he no longer had. "Chief, we had reason to believe—" "That's not what I asked," Morris cut him off sharply. His eyes darkened. "I asked what happened." Keene opened his mouth, hesitated, then closed it again. His silence spoke louder than any excuse he could have given. Morris let out a breath through his nose, pinching the bridge of it like a man who had seen too many messes like this before and was tired of cleaning them up. Finally, he turned back to Nathaniel. "Sir, I deeply apologize for what happened tonight. I take full responsibility." Nathaniel's lips pressed together, his expression unreadable. "You think an apology is enough?" Morris shook his head. "No, sir, I don't. His jaw tightened as he turned back to Bradley and Keene. His voice dropped lower, a quiet fury in it now. Badge and gun. Both of you. Now. Keene's breath hitched. Bradley's face drained of all color. Chief, wait. Bradley tried, but Morris wasn't listening. I said now. Bradley's fingers curled into fists, but he wasn't stupid enough to argue. Not in front of a recording camera. Not in front of the governor. One by one, the two officers unclipped their badges and unholstered their weapons, placing them into Morris's waiting hands. Morris's voice was like ice. You're both suspended, pending an investigation. Bradley's nostrils flared. His fingers twitched like he wanted to say something, wanted to fight back, but he didn't. Nathaniel tilted his head slightly, watching them with the same intensity he would give a man on trial. Not so fun being powerless, is it? Bradley's jaw clenched. He refused to answer. Keene, on the other hand, looked broken. His shoulders had slumped, his hands twitching at his sides. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. Lewis let out a low whistle. Damn, that's what I call justice. Amina's phone never stopped recording. Morris turned back to Nathaniel. I'll personally oversee the investigation, sir. This should have never happened. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, but his expression didn't soften. Number it shouldn't have. He glanced at Rayan then. Finally, the first time he had really looked at him since arriving. There was something there. Not just anger, but something deeper, something more painful. A realization, a question neither of them wanted to say out loud. What if he had arrived just 5 minutes later? Morris turned to Rayan, his expression regretful. Son, I'm sorry. Rayan's throat felt tight. He wasn't sure what to say. Sorry didn't undo anything. Sorry didn't erase the cuffs. The fear. The moment he thought this night would end differently, his voice came out flat. Yeah. Morris exhaled, then looked at the two officers one last time. Get in your car and leave. Now. Bradley hesitated, his pride still making him resist. But he knew. He had lost. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the cruiser. Keene followed, shoulders heavy. The door slammed shut. The engine roared to life. And then, they were gone. The street was quiet again. The neighbors slowly began to lower their phones, their murmurs low, uncertain. Some started to walk away. Others lingered, watching, as if still trying to process what they had just witnessed. Nathaniel let out a slow breath. The fight was over, at least for tonight. But Rayan wasn't sure if it really was. Because as much as he wanted to believe this was justice, he knew better. This time they had the governor to back them up. But what about all the times when nobody did? The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement as the police cruiser disappeared down the road. The hum of its engine faded into the distance, but the tension in the air remained. The people who had gathered, neighbors, strangers, silent witnesses, lingered a little longer, some still gripping their phones, others whispering among themselves. Nathaniel let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders like a man shedding the weight of a long, exhausting battle. His sharp gaze swept over the scene, over the faces of those watching, over the faint marks still visible around Rayan's wrists. He exhaled sharply and turned toward his son. You okay? Rayan didn't answer right away. The question felt complicated. His wrists still throbbed where the cuffs had been. His pulse hadn't completely slowed down yet. He was standing here, free, untouched. But he wasn't okay. He knew that. His father probably knew it too. But he also knew that saying no wouldn't change anything. So he just nodded. Yeah. Nathaniel studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he bent down and picked up Rayan's gym bag from the sidewalk, brushing the dirt off. He extended it toward him. Let's go home. Rayan took the bag, his fingers brushing against the scuffed fabric. It was such a simple thing, taking back something that was his, but it felt like a small piece of his dignity being returned to him. Amina stepped forward then, lowering her phone for the first time. Her expression was still tight with frustration, her eyes flickering between Nathaniel and Rayan. I'll send you the video, she said quietly. If you need it. Nathaniel gave her a firm nod. I appreciate that. Luis shoved his hands into his pockets. You gonna press charges? The question hung in the air. Rayan looked at his father, watching his face closely. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. That's a conversation for another time. Louis let out a dry chuckle. Yeah, that's what they always say. Amina frowned at him, but she didn't disagree. Nathaniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. His face darkened slightly before he slipped it back in. We should go. Rayan wasn't sure why, but that unsettled him. Who was that? Nathaniel didn't answer. Not right away, but the look in his eyes told Rayan enough. This wasn't over. Not really. He didn't push. Instead, he slung his gym bag over his shoulder and turned toward the black SUV parked down the street. Nathaniel followed beside him, the weight of the night still hanging between them. The second they reached the car, Nathaniel opened the driver's side door. Rayan climbed into the passenger seat, sinking into the cool leather. The moment the door shut, sealing them inside, the outside world felt distant, muted. Nathaniel started the engine, but he didn't drive. Instead, he just sat there, gripping the steering wheel tightly, his eyes locked on the road ahead. The dashboard lights cast a faint glow on his face, highlighting the tension in his jaw. Rayan glanced at him sideways. You're mad, Nathaniel exhaled, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Mad? He shook his head. I passed mad about 20 minutes ago. Rayan let out a short breath, staring out the windshield. You've always told me what to do if this ever happened. Stay calm, be polite, don't resist. I did everything right, and they still... His voice cut off, frustration twisting in his chest. Nathaniel finally turned to him. I know. Rayan swallowed hard. He didn't even know what he wanted to say. He didn't know what he expected his father to say either. That's what scares me the most, Nathaniel continued, his voice quieter now. You did everything right, and they still put cuffs on you. The words settled heavily between them. Nathaniel ran a hand over his face, exhaustion creeping into his features. I fight every day to fix this system. Every day, I tell people to trust it, to believe in it. But tonight, he let out a slow breath. Tonight, I watched my own son get thrown against a police car. His grip tightened on the wheel. And for the first time, I don't know if I can keep telling people to trust it. Rayan stared at him. He had never seen his father like this. Frustrated? Sure. Angry? Yes. But defeated? Never. A lump formed in his throat, but he swallowed it down. What happens now? Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. He looked at his son, really looked at him, like he was seeing something different now. Or maybe it was himself he was seeing differently. He finally put the car into drive. Now? His voice was steady again, the weight of a decision already made. Now I make sure this never happens again. The SUV pulled away from the curb, the streetlights casting long, moving shadows across the hood. The flashing blue and red lights from the remaining police car flickered in the rearview mirror, getting smaller and smaller as they drove away. But Rayan knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The ride home was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. The weight of the night sat between Rayan and Nathaniel, like an unseen force, thick and suffocating. The low hum of the SUV's engine filled the silence, but it couldn't drown out the thoughts racing through Rayan's mind. His father's hands were firm on the wheel, knuckles slightly tensed. His expression was unreadable, his jaw clenched as if he were trying to hold back something boiling beneath the surface. Rayan stared out the window, the familiar streets rolling past in a blur. The houses, the street signs, the little corner store where he'd bought snacks 1,000 times. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. He flexed his wrists, still sore from the cuffs. The ghost of their cold metal grip was still there, a lingering reminder of what had just happened. No matter how much he tried to shake it off, he couldn't, because it wasn't just about tonight. It was about every time he had walked into a store and felt eyes follow him. Every time a teacher assumed he wasn't as smart as the white kids. Every time his father had given him the talk, not about girls, but about how to survive an encounter with police. And the worst part? He had listened. He had done everything right, and they still put cuffs on him, his fingers curled into fists. How many times has this happened? Nathaniel didn't respond right away. He kept his eyes on the road, his shoulders stiff. "Dad," a slow exhale. Then finally Nathaniel spoke. "More than I can count." Ryan's stomach tightened. "I was younger than you the first time I got stopped," Nathaniel continued, his voice quieter now. "Walking home from school, a cop said I looked like someone they were looking for. Had me up against a wall, hands behind my back. I hadn't done a damn thing." Ryan looked at him. "What happened?" Nathaniel let out a humorless laugh. "A teacher of mine saw what was happening. She came out screaming at the officers, telling them I was a good kid. They let me go. No apology, no explanation." His fingers drummed against the steering wheel. "I went home that day and asked my father why they did it. He told me, 'Son, they didn't see you. They saw what they wanted to see.'" Ryan turned back toward the window, his chest tightening. "Guess nothing's changed," Nathaniel sighed. "No, son, it has." Ryan gave him a sharp look. "Has it?" Nathaniel didn't flinch. "Yes, because back then, we didn't have cameras. No one would have believed me if I told them what happened. Now?" He shook his head. "Now the world sees it. The world can't ignore it." Ryan wanted to believe that, but the cynicism creeping into his mind was louder. "They still ignore it," he muttered, "even when it's on video." Nathaniel didn't argue. They pulled into the driveway of their house, the motion sensor lights clicking on as soon as the SUV came to a stop. Nathaniel turned off the engine, but neither of them moved. For the first time that night, he looked directly at Ryan. His eyes, usually so composed, so in control, were heavy with something Ryan wasn't used to seeing. "Worry. I can protect you from a lot of things, son," he said. "I can fight laws. I can fight policies. I can fight politicians. But this," he exhaled, "I can't be there every time you step out that door." The words hit Ryan harder than he expected. His father had always been this untouchable figure, strong, powerful, a man who made things happen. But tonight, for the first time, Ryan saw the limits of that power. Nathaniel reached into the center console and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before he placed it in Ryan's hands. "I need you to watch something." Ryan hesitated before taking the phone. On the screen was the video Amina had sent, the recording of his arrest. He hesitated. He didn't want to relive it, but something in his father's expression told him he needed to see it. With a deep breath, he pressed play. The video started mid-shout. "Stop right there! Hands where we can see them!" Ryan's own face appeared on the screen, startled and confused. The officers moved in quickly, grabbing his arms before he even had a chance to react. The sound of metal clicking into place. The camera zoomed in, his wrists in cuffs. "Why are you arresting him?" Amina's voice echoed through the phone. The officers didn't answer. They shoved Ryan forward. He could see the confusion, the fear in his own eyes. The video played on, capturing every second of humiliation, every moment where the people who were supposed to protect him treated him like a criminal. His stomach twisted as he watched his father arrive, watched Bradley and Keene slowly realize who they had just arrested. And then, he saw it. He saw the exact moment Bradley realized Ryan was the governor's son. The shift in his eyes, the subtle panic, the way his entire demeanor changed the second he realized he had power over the wrong person. Ryan hit pause. His grip tightened around the phone. His voice was quiet, but laced with something sharp. "If I was just some random black kid, I'd be in a cell right now." Nathaniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. Ryan clenched his jaw, shaking his head. They weren't sorry. They were scared. Nathaniel leaned back in his seat, his gaze fixed on the darkened windshield. "Now you understand." Ryan let out a breath, his mind racing. This wasn't just about him. It never was. If he had been anyone else, his father wouldn't have gotten there in time. There wouldn't have been a video. There wouldn't have been consequences for those officers. There would have just been another kid lost in the system. His stomach twisted, a strange determination settling in his bones. He wouldn't let this slide. He couldn't. He looked at his father, his voice steady. "What are we going to do about it?" Nathaniel didn't look surprised. He nodded once, like he had been waiting for Ryan to ask that question. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice steady, "we make sure the whole world sees what happened." And with that, the battle lines were drawn. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. The next morning, the house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that sat heavy in the air, filled with unspoken tension. The scent of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen, but Rayan had no appetite. He sat at the dining table, his phone in his hand, staring at the video again. He had watched it twice already, but something about it still didn't feel real. Seeing it happen and living it were two different things. The moment the cuff snapped shut, the way Bradley's face never showed hesitation, the way Keene had looked away, too weak to stop it, but too complicit to speak up. The way everything shifted the second they realized who his father was. It made his stomach turn. Nathaniel's voice pulled him from his thoughts. It's already spreading. Rayan glanced up. His father stood by the kitchen counter, phone pressed to his ear, his face unreadable. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, but Nathaniel looked like he hadn't slept. Rayan unlocked his phone and refreshed his social media feed. The video was everywhere. Justice for Rayan was trending. News outlets had already picked it up. His notifications were flooded with messages, some supportive, some filled with rage, and some from people who still didn't get it. The cops were just doing their jobs. Why didn't he just comply? Oh, now he cares because it happened to his kid. If his dad wasn't the governor, nobody would be talking about this. That last one stung, because it was true. Nathaniel hung up his call and walked over, setting his coffee cup down. He glanced at Rayan's phone screen and exhaled. It's going to get ugly. Rayan locked the phone and looked up at him. It already is. Nathaniel studied his son's face for a moment. We're holding a press conference today. Rayan blinked. What? Nathaniel took a seat across from him. The chief called this morning. He wants to meet before the press conference. He's putting both officers under formal investigation, but that's not enough. Rayan's stomach twisted. It's not enough because if it was anyone else, they'd still have their badges. Nathaniel nodded slowly. Exactly. A heavy silence stretched between them. Rayan drummed his fingers on the table, thinking. Then before he could stop himself, he asked, What if they don't care? Nathaniel frowned slightly. Who? The public. The system. Rayan's voice was sharper than he intended. This happens all the time, right? It happened to you. It happened to 1,000 other kids before me. People tweet, they get mad, and then nothing changes. Nathaniel's expression was unreadable. Then slowly, he said, You think I don't ask myself that every day? Rayan sat back, caught off guard. His father's voice wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was tired. You think I don't wonder if all the policies I've fought for even matter? If the bills I have pushed through have actually saved anyone? Nathaniel leaned forward, his eyes locked on Rayan's. I get it, son. I do. But if we do nothing, then we're part of the problem. Rayan looked away, staring at the table. I know you're angry, Nathaniel said. You should be. I am too. But we can't just sit in that anger. We have to use it. Rayan swallowed hard. The problem was he didn't know how. Before he could say anything else, Nathaniel's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, then stood up. That's the chief. Get ready. We're leaving in 20 minutes. Rayan nodded, but his mind was still spinning. As Nathaniel walked away, Rayan unlocked his phone again. His fingers hovered over the screen before he finally tapped on his messages. Hey, you good? The text was from Malik, his best friend. Rayan hesitated, then typed back, Not really. A few seconds later, the typing bubble appeared. I saw the video. That was messed up, man. I can't believe it. Rayan exhaled sharply. You can believe it. It happens all the time. Another pause, then, Yeah, but not to you. That hit differently. Not because it wasn't true, but because he had spent his whole life thinking he was safe, thinking that being the governor's son meant something. Last night had shattered that illusion. His fingers tightened around his phone. Not anymore. Later that morning, the governor's office was packed. Reporters were setting up their cameras, their microphones, their notepads. Staff members moved briskly, whispering into earpieces, checking last-minute details. Security was tighter than usual. More officers, more caution. Nathaniel sat behind the large wooden desk, scrolling through a document. Across from him, Police Chief Morris stood with his arms crossed, tension in his posture. Rayan sat in the corner, silent, watching them. "This is bad," Morris said bluntly. "I've got officers quitting over this. I've got union reps breathing down my neck. And the department is taking heat from every angle." Nathaniel didn't look up. "Good," Morris exhaled sharply. "Governor." "No, Chief." Nathaniel finally looked at him, his voice firm. "This should have never happened. And now the world knows that it did." Morris rubbed his forehead. "You realize this is going to turn into something bigger, right?" Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. "That's the idea." The chief hesitated. "What exactly do you want from me?" Nathaniel clasped his hands together. "I want the department to acknowledge that racial profiling is a real problem. I want those officers to be fired. Not suspended, not transferred. Fired. And I want policy changes. No more cuff first, question later. No more vague descriptions leading to wrongful arrests." Morris let out a slow breath. "That's a lot." Nathaniel didn't blink. "Good. Then it's the right amount." The chief sighed. "I'll see what I can do." Nathaniel gave a small, humorless smile. "You'll do it, Chief. Because if you don't, this doesn't go away. And you know that as well as I do." Morris didn't argue. The door cracked open, and a staffer peeked inside. "Governor." "They're ready." Nathaniel stood up, adjusting his tie. He turned to Rayan, nodding. "Come on." Rayan's stomach tightened as he stood. This wasn't just about him anymore. As they walked out, the cameras turned toward them, flashes firing, microphones lifting. Reporters shouted over each other. "Governor, what do you have to say about last night's incident? Rayan, how do you feel about what happened? Will the officers be charged? Do you believe this was racial profiling?" Nathaniel stepped up to the podium, cleared his throat, and looked directly into the cameras. He didn't need a script. It was time to make sure the world listened. The room fell into a tense silence as Nathaniel adjusted the microphone. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every movement, every flicker of emotion on his face. Rayan stood just behind him, hands in his pockets, feeling the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes watching. Nathaniel exhaled through his nose, then spoke, his voice steady and deliberate. "Last night, my son was wrongfully detained by 2 officers who assumed he was guilty before even asking a question. They didn't check his ID. They didn't look inside his bag. They didn't even hesitate before putting him in cuffs." A murmur rippled through the crowd of reporters, the clicking of cameras intensifying. Nathaniel continued. "My son was lucky. He had a last name that saved him. But what about the young black men who don't?" The murmuring stopped. The weight of the words settled heavily over the room. Nathaniel's gaze was sharp as he scanned the press. "This isn't just about my family. This is about a system that allows innocent people to be treated like criminals based on the color of their skin. And let's be clear, this is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern." Ryan swallowed hard. He had seen his father deliver speeches before, but never like this. There was no rehearsed polish, no carefully curated political stance. This was raw, personal, real. Nathaniel pressed on. "The officers responsible for this will face consequences. I have spoken with Chief Morris, and I have made it clear that a suspension is not enough. They should not be in uniform. They should not be allowed to patrol our streets." Another murmur rippled through the reporters. A woman in the front row, wearing a Navy press badge, lifted her hand. "Governor, do you believe this was a case of racial profiling?" Nathaniel didn't even hesitate. "Yes." A small gasp rippled through the room. Not because it was shocking, but because most politicians wouldn't have said it out loud. Another reporter cut in, a younger man in a dark suit. "Some are saying this is only getting attention because your son was involved. How do you respond to that?" Nathaniel exhaled. "They're right." His voice was steel. "And that should tell you everything you need to know. If Rayan wasn't my son, if there were no cameras, no witnesses, do you think those officers would have faced consequences? Do you think anyone would be talking about this today?" Silence. Nathaniel's voice dropped lower, more measured. "That is the problem." A reporter in the back, with a voice that carried, called out, "Governor, what's the next step? What do you plan to do about this beyond these 2 officers?" Nathaniel's expression hardened. "We are implementing immediate policy changes. No more handcuffing individuals without probable cause. No more vague descriptions leading to wrongful arrests. And mandatory body cam footage reviews for every stop made by law enforcement in this city. These aren't suggestions. These will be law. The crowd stirred again. This wasn't just damage control. This was action. Nathaniel took a breath. For too long, we've asked the same question. What would have happened if there was no camera? If there was no public outrage? The answer is simple. Nothing. That is why this stops now. The reporters shouted more questions, voices overlapping, but Nathaniel lifted a hand. That's all for now. I will not be taking any more questions. With that, he stepped back from the podium. Rayan followed him off the stage, his pulse still pounding. He had expected his father to fight, but he hadn't expected him to go that far. As they stepped into the hallway, Rayan turned to him. You really think they'll let you change all of that? Nathaniel let out a breath. They won't have a choice. The doors closed behind them. The press conference was over, but Rayan knew this was only the beginning. The hallway outside the press room was eerily quiet compared to the chaos inside. The heavy doors had barely shut behind them when Nathaniel's phone buzzed again. He ignored it. Too many calls. Too many people scrambling to control the fire he had just lit. Rayan walked beside him, his thoughts spinning. The words from the press conference echoed in his mind. These aren't suggestions. These will be law. His father had promised real change. Not just words, not just another statement lost in a sea of political noise. But Rayan had seen the look in some of those reporters' eyes. Doubt. Resistance. He had a feeling this wasn't going to be as simple as a press conference. Nathaniel exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. This fight is going to get ugly. Rayan glanced at him. What do you mean? His father sighed. You think the police union is just going to sit back and let this happen? That officers like Bradley don't have people protecting them? Rayan frowned. They were caught on video. Nathaniel gave him a tired look. And that should be enough, right? But it never is. There will be people, powerful people, who will spin this, make it about something else. They'll say I overstepped, that I'm trying to weaken law enforcement, that I'm just doing this because it was you. Rayan clenched his jaw. So what? They want you to just let it go? Nathaniel let out a bitter chuckle. They don't want justice. They want silence. Before Rayan could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. A group of men in dark suits approached. Advisors, officials, political strategists. The kind of men who always seemed to be behind the scenes, whispering in the ears of people like his father. One of them, a bald man with a stiff posture, stepped forward. His name was Harrison Kane, a longtime political advisor, a fixer. Governor, Kane said, his voice low and urgent. We need to talk. Nathaniel's jaw tensed, but he nodded. Rayan, wait for me in my office. Rayan hesitated. He didn't like the way these men looked at his father. Like they weren't just giving advice, they were issuing warnings. But he didn't argue. With one last glance at Nathaniel, he turned and walked toward the office down the hall. Inside the governor's office. The moment Rayan stepped inside, he let out a slow breath. The room was familiar. Leather chairs, towering bookshelves, a massive desk stacked with paperwork. But today it felt different. His eyes drifted toward the television mounted on the wall. The press conference was already on every major network. He grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. A news anchor appeared, stiff and polished. Governor Nathaniel Pierce has announced sweeping reforms following the wrongful detainment of his son, Rayan Pierce. His bold stance has sparked intense reactions across the political spectrum. The screen cut to a panel of commentators. The first was a woman in a red blazer, her arms crossed. This was a clear case of racial profiling, and the governor is absolutely right to push for change. The second was a man with slicked back hair, shaking his head. But was it really racial profiling, or just an unfortunate misunderstanding? Let's not pretend police don't have difficult jobs. This feels like an overreaction. Rayan's hands clenched into fists. An overreaction? Then a third commentator spoke, a woman with piercing eyes and a sharp voice. The real question is, would this have even been a conversation if Rayan wasn't the governor's son? How many others have been in this exact position and never gotten justice? Rayan exhaled. At least someone was saying it. Just then, the door swung open. Nathaniel stepped inside, his face unreadable. He shut the door behind him and let out a slow breath. Rayan muted the TV. What did they want? Nathaniel walked to his desk and sat down heavily. He rubbed his temples for a moment before finally speaking. They want me to back off. Rayan felt his stomach twist. Back off? Nathaniel nodded. They say the police union is pushing back hard. They're calling my proposed laws dangerous and anti-police. Some of my own party members are starting to waver. Rayan scoffed. Are you serious? After everything? Nathaniel looked at him, his expression tight. They don't care about what happened to you, Rayan. They care about how it looks, and they think I went too far. Rayan couldn't believe what he was hearing. So what? They want you to just let this go? Sweep it under the rug? Nathaniel shook his head. They want me to adjust the policies, make them less strict, keep the unions happy. He exhaled sharply. They don't want real change. They want damage control. Rayan stared at him. What are you going to do? Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. He leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers against the desk. Finally, he looked at Rayan, and for the first time in hours, he looked like a father, not just a politician. I have a choice, Nathaniel said slowly. I can listen to them, keep things as they are, avoid a political war, or I can fight. Rayan didn't hesitate. Fight? Nathaniel studied him, searching his face. You understand what that means? Rayan's jaw tightened. Yeah, it means we don't let them bury this. Nathaniel nodded slowly, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. Then he reached into his drawer and pulled out a stack of papers. Rayan leaned forward. What's that? Nathaniel placed them on the desk. The official policy reform proposal. It goes into effect next week. He tapped the papers. If I sign this, I go to war with the police union. They'll attack me from every angle. They'll dig up my past. They'll come for you. For our family, Rayan's throat tightened. Nathaniel's voice softened. Are you ready for that? Rayan swallowed. Are you? A beat of silence. Then Nathaniel grabbed a pen. Without another word, he signed his name at the bottom of the document. The ink dried. The decision was made. Nathaniel looked up at his son. His voice was steady. Now, let's see who tries to stop us. The weight of the signature lingered in the air like an unspoken challenge. The battle was official now. There was no going back. Nathaniel slid the signed document across the desk and leaned back in his chair. His expression was unreadable, but Rayan could tell. His father was preparing for war. A moment of silence stretched between them before Nathaniel finally spoke. You should head home, son. Things are going to get messy. Rayan didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the document, then drifted to his father. No. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. No? I'm not going home, Rayan said firmly. Not while this is happening. Not while people are out there saying this is just politics. Nathaniel studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. I should have known you wouldn't just sit this out. I shouldn't have to, Rayan shot back. His voice was sharp, but it wasn't anger. It was frustration. This happened to me, Dad. And you're right. If you weren't who you are, I'd be sitting in a cell right now. How do I just walk away from that? Nathaniel exhaled through his nose, rubbing his temple. This fight is dangerous, Rayan. These people... He stopped himself, then started again. They don't fight fair. Rayan clenched his fists. Neither do the cops who put me in cuffs. Nathaniel sighed. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. Rayan's voice was quieter now. But I can't pretend this didn't happen. And I won't let them pretend either. Nathaniel studied him for a long moment. Then finally he nodded. All right. A knock on the door broke the moment. Nathaniel straightened. Come in. The door opened, and Harrison Kane walked in, his expression stiff as ever. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. It's begun. Rayan frowned. What's begun? Kane placed a tablet on the desk and slid it toward them. Nathaniel tapped the screen, and a news broadcast appeared. A suited anchor with neatly styled hair spoke in a clipped tone. The backlash against Governor Pierce's new policy is already gaining momentum. Law enforcement unions across the state are calling the proposal reckless and a direct attack on the police force. Meanwhile, opposition leaders claim the governor is using his son's experience for political gain. The screen cut to a press conference, a different one. A man in a police uniform stood at the podium, his expression tight with barely hidden anger. The governor's new policies are an insult to every man and woman in uniform, the officer declared. He is making it harder for us to do our jobs. He's undermining the very people who keep this city safe. And why? Because his son had a bad experience? I'm sorry, but that's not how the law works. Rayon's stomach twisted. Kane exhaled. That's just the beginning. Nathaniel's expression darkened. The smear campaign. Kane nodded. They're hitting you from every angle. Police unions, political rivals, even some of your own party members. They're calling you anti-police, soft on crime. Some are even pushing for an emergency vote to block the policy before it goes into effect. Rayon's blood ran cold. They can do that? Nathaniel's jaw tightened. If they get enough support, yes. Kane hesitated, then pulled out a folder. He placed it on the desk and flipped it open. Inside were printed news articles, tweets, leaked emails. They're already digging. Kane's voice was grim. Trying to find anything they can use against you. Nathaniel barely glanced at the papers. They won't find anything. Kane exhaled through his nose. Governor, they don't need to find something real. They just need something loud. A distraction. A scandal. Rayan grabbed one of the papers and scanned it. His stomach twisted. Anonymous sources suggest that Governor Pierce's sudden push for reform is more about securing political points than actual justice. Another headline. Soft on crime, Governor Pierce's radical reforms could put officers in danger. And then, one that made Rayon's skin crawl. The real story behind Rayon Pierce's arrest. Was he really innocent? Rayon's chest tightened. Are you kidding me? He looked up. They're trying to say I did something wrong? Kane's expression didn't change. That's how they play the game. Nathaniel let out a slow breath, his fingers tapping against the desk, thinking, calculating. Then finally he leaned forward. They want a war? His voice was quiet but dangerous. Fine. He looked at Kane. Call every ally we have. Civil rights leaders, legal experts, community organizers. If they want to fight, we give them one. Kane nodded. I'll set up meetings immediately. Nathaniel's gaze flickered to Rayan. You still sure you want to be in this? Rayan didn't hesitate. More than ever. Nathaniel gave a small approving nod. Then he turned back to Kane. Schedule another press conference tonight. Kane raised an eyebrow. Are you sure that's a good idea? The opposition is already painting you as reckless. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Then I guess it's time to remind them who they're dealing with. Kane nodded, then left the office, shutting the door behind him. For a moment, silence. Then Rayan exhaled, shaking his head. They're really going to spin this into me being guilty, aren't they? Nathaniel's expression softened slightly. They'll try, Rayan scoffed. And people will believe it. Nathaniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. Listen to me, son. His voice was steady, strong. The truth is loud, but lies? Lies are deafening. Rayan met his father's eyes. If we want people to hear the truth, Nathaniel continued, we're going to have to make more noise than them. Rayan exhaled slowly, his fist tightening. He had been the one in cuffs. He had been the one humiliated. And now they were trying to flip the script. Number they weren't going to bury this. Rayan looked at his father, his voice filled with resolve. Then let's make some noise. Nathaniel gave a small, proud smile. Let's. The sun had barely started to set when the governor's second press conference of the day began. The room was even more crowded than before. Reporters packed shoulder to shoulder, their cameras pointed toward the podium like weapons ready to fire. The tension was thick, the air heavy with anticipation. Nathaniel stood at the podium, his posture straight, his expression controlled. Ryan stood just behind him, arms crossed, his heartbeat steady but quick. He wasn't nervous. He was ready. Nathaniel glanced at the sea of reporters, then spoke, his voice clear, deliberate. Earlier today, I announced new policy measures that will protect innocent civilians from wrongful detainment and racial profiling. He paused. I also said that this isn't just about my son. It's about every person who has ever been falsely targeted, who didn't have a camera or a last name to protect them. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Nathaniel's gaze hardened. Since then, there has been an effort to distort the truth, a coordinated attempt to discredit my family, to twist this into something it is not. Reporters leaned in closer. Nathaniel didn't break eye contact with the cameras. Let me be clear. The officers who handcuffed my son did so without cause. They never asked him a single question. They never checked his ID. They saw a black teenager and made a decision. A dangerous, reckless, and completely unjustified decision. His voice sharpened. Now, instead of taking responsibility, certain groups want to shift the focus. They want to turn this into an attack on the police, to make it seem like justice is somehow a threat to law enforcement. He shook his head. Justice is not a threat, but unchecked power is. The room tensed. The sound of camera shutters clicking filled the silence. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now. Some of my opponents have suggested that I am only fighting this battle because it happened to my son. A pause. They're right. A murmur of surprise swept through the crowd. Nathaniel continued, his voice steady. It did take seeing my own child in cuffs to push me to act faster. And for that, I will hold myself accountable. He exhaled. But do you know who should be holding themselves accountable? The people who have always known this was happening and did nothing. Ryan felt something stir inside him. His father wasn't backing down. He was going further. Nathaniel's voice carried through the room. I have spent my career defending law enforcement. I have worked side by side with officers who believe in protecting and serving their communities. But real leadership is about recognizing when something is broken and fixing it, and this system is broken. A reporter stood up, raising his hand. Governor, some law enforcement unions are calling your policies a dangerous overreach. They say you're making it harder for police to do their jobs. How do you respond? Nathaniel's jaw tightened. What happened to my son wasn't doing their job. It was negligence. It was bias. It was a violation of his rights. His voice was razor sharp now. If stopping racial profiling and wrongful detainment makes some officers uncomfortable, then maybe they shouldn't be officers. The room erupted. Reporters shouted over each other, some scribbling frantically in their notebooks, others trying to get the next question in. Nathaniel raised a hand. One more. A woman in the back stood up. Governor, there are reports circulating that your son may not have been as innocent as you claim, that his detainment might have been justified. What do you say to those allegations? Rayan froze. There it was. The smear. The narrative they were trying to build. Nathaniel turned slightly and gestured to Rayan. I'll let him answer that. Ryan's breath hitched. He hadn't expected that. The room went completely silent as every camera turned toward him. Ryan swallowed, then stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. I was walking home from the gym. I had my headphones in. I wasn't doing anything wrong. He looked straight into the cameras. But that didn't matter, because I fit the description. His jaw clenched. I did everything right. I didn't resist. I didn't run. I stayed calm. But they still threw me against a car and put cuffs on me like I was already guilty. He exhaled. So to the people trying to say I wasn't innocent, I have a question. What would I have needed to do to be treated like I was? The silence was deafening. Rayan looked around the room, his heartbeat steady now. If you're defending what happened to me, then you're proving my father's point. You're proving why this policy is necessary. He took a step back. That's all I have to say. Nathaniel placed a hand on his shoulder. We're done here. The governor turned away from the podium, guiding Rayan toward the exit. Reporters shouted after them, desperate for more, but they didn't stop. As they stepped into the hallway, the heavy doors shut behind them. Ryan let out a slow breath, his chest rising and falling. His father looked at him, nodding slightly. You did good. Ryan met his eyes. So did you. Nathaniel exhaled. That was the easy part. Ryan frowned. That was the easy part. Nathaniel's gaze hardened. Now we see what they do next. The fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. The air outside the press room was thick with tension. Nathaniel and Rayan walked side by side, their steps purposeful, their minds still spinning from everything that had just unfolded. The weight of what they had done, what they had set in motion, hung between them. The hallway was lined with security, aides, and political staffers whispering into phones, their faces tight with urgency. This wasn't just a press conference anymore. This was a war. As they neared the exit, Nathaniel's personal assistant, Elena, rushed up to him, phone in hand. Her usually composed expression was replaced with something sharp, something urgent. "Governor, you need to see this." Nathaniel took the phone. Rayon leaned in, his pulse quickening. On the screen was a live news broadcast, but it wasn't about the policies. It wasn't even about the press conference. It was about him. The screen showed a grainy security camera image from months ago. Rayan standing outside a convenience store late at night. The headline below the footage was bold and damning. "Governor's son caught in late-night altercation. Is this the full story?" Rayan's chest tightened. Nathaniel's expression darkened. "What the hell is this?" Elena's voice was rushed. "They're trying to paint Rayan as a troublemaker, saying this isn't the first time he's been in a questionable situation." Rayan's pulse pounded. "That's not what happened." Nathaniel's grip on the phone tightened. "I know." The broadcast cut to a panel of commentators, already dissecting the so-called scandal. One of them, a sharp-suited man with a smug expression, smirked. "This changes things, doesn't it? The governor's making all these accusations about the police. But maybe his son isn't so innocent after all." Another commentator, a woman with piercing eyes, nodded. "Exactly. We need to ask, was this latest incident really racial profiling? Or was it just good police work?" Rayan felt his body heat up with frustration. They were twisting it. Again. Nathaniel clenched his jaw, his nostrils flaring. He handed the phone back to Elena, his voice low. "Get ahead of this. Find out who leaked it. I want names." Elena nodded and disappeared down the hall. Ryan ran a hand over his face. "They're really doing this." Nathaniel looked at him. "They're scared." Ryan let out a sharp laugh. "Yeah, well, they're playing dirty." His father nodded. "That's what happens when people in power feel threatened. They don't fight fair." Ryan shook his head. "So what do we do?" Nathaniel's eyes burned with determination. "We don't play defense. We go on offense." Ryan frowned. "What do you mean?" Nathaniel exhaled. "They want to drag us down in the mud. Make this about you. Distract from the real issue." He turned, walking toward his office. "So we don't let them." Ryan followed. "How?" Nathaniel didn't stop. "By making sure this isn't just about us anymore." Inside the office, Nathaniel grabbed his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Then, without hesitation, he pressed a name and held the phone to his ear. After a few rings, a voice answered. "Governor?" Nathaniel's voice was steady. "Get me a meeting with every family who has lost someone to police violence. Every mother, every father, every person who has been ignored." Rayan blinked. "Dad?" Nathaniel glanced at him. "They want to make this personal? Fine. Then we make it personal for everyone." Ryan stared at his father. Then slowly he nodded. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every kid who wasn't the governor's son. Every family that never got justice. Every name that became just another hashtag. Nathaniel hung up the phone. He turned to Rayon, his expression unreadable. "This fight isn't going to be easy." Rayon met his eyes. "Good." Nathaniel exhaled. Then he placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Then let's finish what they started." And with that, father and son stepped into battle together. The fight for justice had just begun. That's the end of the story, but now I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on what happened? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. See you in the next one.